Hello and welcome to Positive Leadership Podcast, the podcast that helps you grow as an individual, as a leader, and eventually as a global citizen. I'm Jean-Philippe Courtois, and today I'm truly honored to welcome a remarkable young woman whose courage, voice, and vision are helping reshape the global climate movement. In 2019, as a student in Uganda, she began speaking out for communities facing devastating climate consequences, drought, floods, landslides. And what began as one personal act of conviction grew into a movement the world could no longer ignore. She's a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, Malala Fund board member, founder of the Rise Up movement, creator of the Vash Green Schools project, bringing solar power to 75 plus schools in Uganda, and author of the acclaimed memoir of A Bigger Picture, and as of this year, a Master of Public Policy student at Oxford. She embodies positive leadership through courage, empathy, and a deep belief that climate justice and social justice are inseparable. Vanessa Nakate, a very warm welcome to the Positive Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much. Really happy to be here. Actually, I've graduated from Oxford now.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
So this just happened, right?
Yes, I graduated in November last year.
Excellent. So, Vanessa, I always like to begin, by understanding where someone's journey started. Childhood, the family, the values that shape who you would become. You were born and raised in Kampala, Uganda, in a family I think where education was deeply valued. Your mother is a teacher. You are the eldest of four children. And growing up in Uganda in the 90s and 2000s, I'm sure you witness firsthand the impacts of climate change on your community. And so this is really something I'd like to understand is that can you take us back to your childhood in Kampala? And what values did your family again instill in you that still guide you today?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I did grow up with both my parents and my siblings, and I think I realized much later on in my activism how much of the values that I learned as a child or as a growing young adult really shaped my activism. And one of the things that comes to mind was the fact that my dad was so involved in Rotary Club activities.
Mm.
And I remember there was a year he was the Rotary president of one of the clubs in Kampala, and he led, a mission of planting trees across the
Ah,
country. I remember being, excited about this, but also I remember, asking for a shirt to be involved in this. But that was like years before I actually started activism. And I
hmm.
think in a way, seeing my dad already working to make the environment a better place, I believe that it did something in my heart that eventually inspired me to become an activist years later on. And then really growing up, I think for my family, to many people, the word sustainability, seems like something new or something that you have
Hmm.
to become. But when I
Yes.
think about my childhood, I realized that sustainability was literally the way of life. When I think about how our mom used to be or our parents used to be so
Hmm.
paying attention so much to food and ensuring that there was no food wastage, and if food stayed, it would we would keep it for the next day in the
Yeah.
morning. I think those.
I. Hmm. Yeah. Maurice is going to be challenging. Hello, Vanessa? Vanessa?
Yeah, I'm
W-
back.
You are frozen. So I think you can continue if you don't mind. You are talking about food waste. And maybe you just,
Yes.
it's okay for you, Tom? Yeah. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Yes, I believe growing up with that understanding of, the respect for food and not wasting it, but also even in how we got new clothes at home. I remember in my childhood, you would get a new cloth like on Christmas. So once
Hmm.
a year, or sometimes on Easter. So that's twice a year. And as I grew up, I realized that we were already living sustainable lives even before people started talking about sustainability. When I think about how, the fashion industry right now is heavily impacting the environment, when I think about the impact of food wastage, I realize that for many families like mine, sustainability was not something that we had to become. It was something that we actually lived. And I think that played a part in my activism journey.
So it was really part of your life every single day, Vanessa. And would you mind sharing with me as well some of the discussions going on at the dinner table, maybe with your family, your siblings, your mom as well, maybe even your grandparents, just to give us a sense maybe of the values, and the conversation you're having as a family.
Well, it's hard to point out a specific conversation on a dinner table because we did not have that growing
Okay.
up.
Okay.
Uh, I remember we used to get food and maybe either sit in the compound or
Yep.
sit in the sitting room on the mats, but really we didn't have like specific dinner conversations.
Yes.
But we did have childhood conversations about life and, about dreams and things that we wanted to become. But in terms of values, I would say the values are also really rooted in my Christianity. I grew up in a Christian home. My
Mm.
parents raised us as Christians, and it's something that I'm glad that I was able to learn, that I was introduced to, because again in my journey of activism, I later started to read, scripture in the understanding of environmentalism, understanding, the heart of God towards environmental protection.
Mm.
And it made me realize that actually, in a way, even the values and everything that I have been taught in Christianity since a young age played a really critical role in shaping me as an activist.
Yeah. No, we'll come back to that aspect of your education, Vanessa, because I think it's certainly something very significant, relevant, Christianity in the way you think and the way you see the world. But can you tell us more about some of the early experiences you had in Uganda, whether again witnessing climate impacts in your community or seeing as well inequality, or learning again from your family? You talked about going with your dad, planting a tree. So anything, any event in your mind as a young girl that really awaken your sense of justice and responsibility.
I would say this is something that actually happened in my when I was in high school,
Yeah.
and by that time I didn't know the word activism, and
Mm.
I had no idea that what I was doing was activism at that time. And I remember the school that I was in. I remember the girls in my school were constantly attacked by boys from another school,
Mm.
and there was a specific um, there was a specific person or a group of boys who would shame the girls in my school on social media,
Mm.
and they at that time it was mostly on Facebook, and I was really really disturbed by it, very disturbed, because you don't know who is doing this, and
Yeah.
people are constantly being shamed. I think for me that is when actually the activist in me really awakened, but I didn't know what that was because it was a one-time thing, and then I just continued with school. So I remember creating an account on social media,
Yeah.
and every time this person would post something about a girl in my school, I never
Yeah.
got to know the person, and I believe they also never got to know me. But every time this person would post a shaming post about a girl in my school, because I was in a girls' school,
Yeah.
I would respond to that post.
Aha.
And my continuous responses to those posts made the person stop doing that. And
Okay.
because they also realize that, there is someone who is ready to like fight back if you are attacking girls in high school. People never got to know. They never got to know that. But
Yeah.
it's something that I believe really awakened activism in me, but I just didn't know that it actually had a name.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. What age did you actually started being active on social media?
By that time, oh my, I must have, I think I was 16.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Many
Okay.
people actually don't know this. I think it may be the first time that I've actually said this.
Aha. Okay. So this is a scoop. No, very interesting. And obviously, given the development of social media these days, which are even more troublesome in terms of bullying people and kids between each others. Great to hear that you had this very first reaction early on to fight back. So now I'd like to move
Yeah.
forward, Vanessa, and talk about January 2019. I think you are a 22-year-old business student at Makerere University, and you've read about Greta Thunberg striking in Sweden, and you decided to do the same in Kampala. But for months, my understanding is that you are completely alone, just you. Sometimes your siblings holding signs outside the parliament in the sweltering heat. So, can you take us to that first day outside parliament? What were you feeling and what kept you coming back, I think, every Friday when no one else was showing up?
Yeah, I would say that when I got to learn how climate change was really affecting the people in Uganda, when I really got to understand it, because we do learn about climate change in school, but I mean, we never learned it to that place that pushes us to understand its urgency and also to understand how it was affecting people deeply. And when I really got to learn that and connect the floods and the droughts that were already happening in some parts of the country to climate change, in that moment I wanted to do something about it. And I think it must have been the same thing that was awakened when I saw girls in my school being bullied and being shamed
Yeah.
on social media, which is sad that it's still continuing. Women are still constantly being attacked on social media. So I think it was that same feeling of wanting to do something about it that really led me into activism.
Yeah.
I got to learn about Fridays for Future. I got to learn about Greta's work. I'm forever inspired by the work that she does. And I'm
Hmm.
really grateful that I got to learn about her work because it also gave me the strength to step out to hold that very first climate strike. I was really scared, being naturally I was naturally a very, very shy person. I am, it's much better for me now it's easier for me now to communicate because I think of the time I've spent in activism, but it was
Yeah.
much worse for me to communicate, just being in the public eye when I just started. But then it was again that voice in my heart, that push in my heart telling me to go and hold this first climate strike. For the very first one, I had it with some of my siblings and my cousins, and it was it wasn't easy. It was hard, but we wanted to do this, and we did it in different locations, but it wasn't easy because they were all younger than me, and obviously if someone saw us on the streets, they would know I am the one responsible for bringing the kids on the streets to hold these placards. But then after that, some of my friends also started
Uh-huh.
to join the strike. Sometimes it would be one person, sometimes it would be two people, sometimes it would be just me.
Okay.
And yeah, it was never easy, even doing that climate strike at the parliament. I did one climate strike there with my friend Elton, and it wasn't easy for us to do that. And I
Eh,
don't
eh,
think it gets easier.
No, but tell us more about some of the connection you did there, because I'm sure that you some people bumped into you, right, at the entrance of the parliament. Did you actually met with some MPs from the parliaments in Uganda, or some other executives or media? How did it go actually? How did you raise some interest from public opinion?
I would say that some people that saw me in front of the parliament with my friend, or some people that saw me in the different areas where I would hold the climate strikes, I think they looked at me as this person who really had nothing to do. And it was embarrassing for sure to stand on the streets, because I think that was the peak. My sister called it the peak of being cool, of doing things that people is so very cool, and I was doing this thing that people found embarrassing. And people did find it embarrassing because in the long run, after a year of my activism, even my dad told me, relatives reached out to him, family friends telling him that I was embarrassing the family by standing on the streets. So yes, in the public there are people who thought that what I was doing was embarrassing, and I think that was the bigger percentage. However, there were also people that thought that what I was doing was important. Because I
Hmm.
remember the very first strike I had with my siblings and cousins. A lady came up to us, and she told us about the incredible work we were doing.
Yeah.
She told us about a school that was being constructed and trees were being cut down, and she was really bothered by that. So I would say that there were people that were on our side. There were
Hmm.
people that didn't really know what we were doing, and then there were
Yeah.
also people that thought that we were being an embarrassment. So
Yeah, and it didn't bother you. Obviously, you kept going. You kept coming back all the time. I like to connect that back to the mention you made, Vanessa, of your Christian faith. Do you think that it is that gave you that energy, that commitment? I think one day you said it gave you a sense of divine responsibility for activism. Can you help us understand what divine responsibility actually meant to you? And how do you see your faith shaping your climate work, in your childhood and probably even today, actually?
So when I started activism, I didn't know the connection between faith and climate work. In fact, I didn't know a lot of things. I just knew that we were doing these climate strikes to raise awareness about what was happening in our communities,
Yeah.
about the disasters that climate change was causing. But I actually didn't know so much beyond that. I didn't know the impact of the fossil fuel industry. I didn't know the impact of the fashion industry. Many of these things I learned on the job. If someone
Hmm.
can, like people say, to learn on the
Yep.
job too. So that is how I got to learn many of these things. And even the aspect of faith, it was not there in the beginning, but it came later on when I started to, again, because I was already a Christian. And then I started to ask myself, like, what does God have to do about this? And
Yeah.
like, would God be an environmentalist? Would God be an activist? I started asking myself those questions, and they led me to try and read the
Hmm.
Bible and see the connections. And I really got to learn that the very first responsibility that God gave to humanity was to take care of the earth. And it was like the very first assignment that was given to human beings. And for
Yes.
me, that was it for me. In that moment, it's
Hmm.
like, this is it. Like, if God was like, God would be an activist. In fact, he's an environmentalist because he prioritized the taking care of the earth. Because when the earth is well taken care of, then our well-being is also well taken care of. So then activism went beyond just being something that I wanted to do for my community, but it became it became a divine mandate or
Hmm.
responsibility, and even purpose that I have on this earth. And I mean, I've asked myself so many times, what am I doing here on this earth? What is my purpose here? What is my role here?
Yeah.
And when I got to learn about some of those scriptures that point to environmental protection. So yeah, when I got to understand, you know, biblical understanding on the environment and its protection, then activism became, more than something that I wanted to do for my communities. It became something that I feel like was a responsibility or a purpose to do on this earth.
No, very clear, Vanessa. And thanks for sharing this very intimate connection in a way with your Christian faith and this awakening with your activism. Now I'd like us to go to another, what has been called a crucible moment in your life, which is obviously a very young life. By the way, for our listeners, if you want to know more about what a crucible is, you should check out the episode with Bill George on North Star. It is one of those moments we have in our lives at different times, which is going to shape us. And I think that moment was for you, Vanessa, on January 24, 2020. You were in a place I've gone to many years in Davos for the World Economic Forum. And
Hmm.
you are together with four other young climate activists, Greta Thunberg, Louisa Nabar, Isabel Axelson, and Lucina Tille. And you are giving a press conference all together. And you pose for photos. And the next day, the Associated Press distributes a photo from that event. Four activists are in it, all white, all European, and you've been cropped out. So, what went through your mind when you saw that picture without you? And what made you decide to speak out publicly rather than staying silent?
Yeah, I do agree. It was a very defining moment in my activism. I think, like you've said, everyone probably has those moments in their life, because what happened was a shock to me, but also what happened like made me realize that this world is can be hurtful and really cruel sometimes, whether someone has done something intentionally or unintentionally. And for me, that moment, right now, when I talk about it, it's much easier because it's been
Yes.
6 years.
Yeah.
However, at that time when it happened, it was really a hard time for me. I was firstly in a very cold country at that time.
Yes.
So merging extreme cold with heartbreak is not very advisable. So it was a really, really heartbreaking moment for me when I saw that picture, because I
Yeah.
really felt that I was excluded from the conversation, and it made me feel like I didn't deserve to be there.
Hmm.
And
And
I
so, what did
definitely
you do?
cried a lot
I'm sure you
on
cried a
that
lot.
moment.
Yes.
Um, but when I saw the picture, my immediate thought was to ask why I had been cropped out, because I knew that I was in the picture when we took that picture. So, and I think when I asked that question, I didn't really anticipate how many people it would reach and how many people would come to support me and ask that question as well. And I'm forever grateful for everyone who stood with me in that moment. But yeah, it was a hard moment for me.
And you obviously reacted on social media, right? I think you had a response saying you did not just erase a photo, you erased the continent. Is that right?
Yeah, that is what I said. Because in that picture, I was the only person from my country. I was the only person from the African continent.
Yes.
And I was the only black girl in that picture, and I was taken out. And at that moment, that is how I felt, that this was, beyond removing an individual from a picture. It was about removing the experiences and the realities and stories of people from my country, of people from my continent, who are heavily impacted by a climate crisis that they didn't even cause.
So you basically stood up for your entire continent, Vanessa, didn't you?
I mean, if you say so, I think I did. I believe that. I mean, I've said for so many times, in that I keep on repeating myself, that, Africa as a continent is historically responsible for less than 4%
Yeah.
of global emissions, and yet it is on the front lines of the climate disaster reality. And while it's on the front lines of these realities, it is not on the front pages of the world's newspapers. I've said that so many times, and
Yes.
in that moment, I did feel that it had been cropped out.
Yeah. No, what a shame again for the organizers of that event and for the world. And since then, as you said, I mean, here you've become one of the leading voices for racial justice in the climate movement. And the numbers tell the story, as you just shared with us, right? Africa contributes less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and yet it suffers some of the most devastating climate impacts in the world. The West and developed countries responsible for the vast majority of historical emissions continue to pollute, while African communities face droughts, floods, famines, and displacements. And I think you've been articulating that injustice very powerfully. You said we cannot eat coal, we cannot drink oil, money will be useless on a dead planet. And you said as well, alongside Greta Thunberg, while we may all be in the same storm, we are not all in the same boat. Can you explain us, Vanessa, why centering African and global South voices is essential for solving the climate crisis?
Yes, just to build on what I've already said, that many of these communities are not responsible for the crisis that they are experiencing right now, and they deserve to be in the rooms where decisions are being made. They deserve to be, in the spaces where climate conversations are happening. You really can't have climate justice if those that are being impacted the most are not in the rooms, because you won't understand their stories, you don't know their experiences, and you can't speak for their communities. I personally believe that communities must speak for themselves, and many times these communities are called missing, voices, but they're not missing voices, they are actually speaking. They're just not granted or given the platforms
To speak.
that amplify what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I think, firstly, it's important to understand that these communities are not missing voices. They are existing. They have been speaking for their communities for so long, and their calls and demands deserve to be listened to, and they deserve to be acted upon. Jane Fonda once said that there would be no climate crisis if it wasn't for racism. And someone may say, how is this even connected? But when you look at, the history that has led us to the climate crisis, you'll find that this is a history that is deeply rooted in the extraction of resources from these communities. You'll find that it's a history that is deeply rooted in the extraction of, their lands, extraction of their bodies through slavery. So you will find that the system that has led us to the climate crisis is the same system that allowed for colonialism, that allowed for extraction, that allowed for stealing from indigenous lands, global south communities. And these communities still pay the price for that history, and now they're even paying for what is happening right now. And it's not just happening, indigenous communities. It's not just happening, in global south communities, across, the small island states, or across
Yeah.
the African continent, or across Asia. You will find that it's even happening in Black communities in the United States. You'll find that they are more exposed to living in neighborhoods surrounded by power plants, or neighborhoods exposed to pollution of the air, of the, of their water, of their land. So you realize that the very people that were deeply harmed by colonial systems of oppression continue to be harmed by the climate crisis. This is why we need these people in the rooms where decisions are happening, because they know what is happening in their communities. They know the challenges that they face. And when they know the challenges, it means they also know the solutions that can make their communities better.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you've been very clear about some of the historical context of that situation, Vanessa. And to me, your philosophy is pretty clear. I mean, climate change, I think you said, is not about statistics or net zero targets. It's about people. It's about those who did not cause the crisis being on the front lines and their voices being unheard. So, listening to that, what do world leaders and Western audiences, whom I've got many listeners from the West on this podcast, what do they fundamentally misunderstand about climate justice, and what needs to change in how we approach this crisis?
I believe that sometimes people, especially from Western countries, don't really realize how big of a challenge the climate crisis is. And for many people, you find that climate change is a distant threat, not something that is happening in their communities right now. And also, you find that in many Western countries, there are resources available to immediately support people uh, and help them recover from climate disasters.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen that in some countries within Europe. We've seen the resources being availed immediately to help people recover, which is a bit different in other countries, especially across the global south. For many communities in the global south, we are not waiting for climate change to happen. It is not something that we see from afar, something that's coming in the future, something that we have to, worry that, the children of the next generation are going to inherit. It is something that people are already experiencing right now.
Yeah.
When you talk about food scarcity, it's already happening.
Yeah.
Water scarcity, it's already happening. You just have to look at what the drought in the Horn of Africa has caused. When we talk about floods, they are already happening. We are already seeing intense rainfall across so many communities. And I think that's what I would love people in Western countries to understand, that the fight for climate justice
Mm.
for the people in global South countries, it is literally a fight for life. It's a fight
Yes.
for life because there is a thin line between life and death for these communities. When a disaster happens, it's not just about the statistics that come from people that have been impacted. It's
Yeah.
beyond that. It's what happens after that.
So
sometimes
lies.
people
Mm.
sometimes people end on the news and what the news has reported on a disaster in a certain country, but entire social infrastructure is damaged in these
Mm.
processes, and it takes in these situations, and it takes years for countries to rebuild their health facilities, to rebuild their education
Mm.
facilities. So for me, what I would want people in the Western countries to understand, that when we say that we may all be facing the same storm but we're in different boats, we really
Yes.
mean that for certain communities, climate change is not something that they expect to see in the future. It is happening now.
Yes. Well, thank you for painting such a clear picture of the reality on the ground in Africa. As clearly, I think this it's quite misunderstood across the world. And to continue on that dialogue, Vanessa, I'd like us to zoom on Africa in a particular country and place. I think you know well the Congo rainforest. The Congo Basin rainforest, for listeners, is the second largest tropical rainforest in the world after the Amazon that we often talk about. And that rainforest in Congo is covering 6 countries and spanning 500 million acres. I think it's often called the lungs of Africa, absorbing massive amounts of carbon dioxide and producing oxygen that benefits the entire planet. Yet it's being destroyed at an alarming rate. Deforestation, illegal logging, mining, agricultural expansion. And unlike the Amazon, which gets significant global attention, the Congo rainforest destruction is largely ignored. The communities living there receive little support while their land is exploited for resources that fuel consumption in wealthy countries. Can you talk about that Congo rainforest crisis, Vanessa, that is, I think, broadly ignored, and what urgent action is needed to protect it and support the communities there?
Yes. When I got to learn about the Congo rainforest, I believe it was 2019, and I was giving a speech at a Rotary Club in Kampala because
Yeah.
I was invited. And after my speech, one of the people that was listening asked me a question similar to what you've said. He asked me why there is not much focus on the Congo rainforest, and yet
Mm.
it is the second largest rainforest in the world. And why aren't people looking at what is happening to it, and the
Yeah.
destruction that was happening? And in that moment, even I myself, I reflected and realized that I did not know much about what was happening there. I knew about the Amazon, but I didn't know much about the Congo rainforest,
Mm.
which is literally next door to me.
Yeah.
So I decided to read about it, and I was really amazed by. At this point, I think it's not just the lungs of Africa. I think it's obviously the lungs of the world
Of
as
the
well.
world. Yes.
Of the world. I think it doesn't, the existence of the Congo rainforest is not just for Africa. I
Yeah.
think it's for the world, and its preservation does not just benefit the African continent, it benefits all of us. So in that moment, I really got to learn that, there was deforestation that was happening there, and I learned about the millions of people
Mm.
that were reliant on this forest, many indigenous communities. And I decided to start a strike to it was more like an awareness to save Congo rainforest and also really raise awareness on it. And in that time, I really didn't know if it would have any impact. And now that I think about it, in almost every conversation I've had, there's been a question about the Congo rainforest,
Mm.
which makes me really glad that I got to learn about it and also to do like that awareness strike to tell people to save Congo rainforest, to tell people what was happening in Congo rainforest and why its survival is important for all of us. And to see that, in some of the conversations I've had, there have been people who have said, I have never heard about this rainforest. Thank you so much for talking about it. So I'm just really grateful that with some other activists that I've been able to work with and colleagues from actually the DRC,
Yep.
if I'm to name drop one of them, Kalonji Guillaume, he's been an incredible friend and colleague in working on, the issues that are affecting the DRC right now. So not just with even the Congo rainforest, but also with what many are terming as green colonialism, taking critical minerals from the Congo to power electric vehicles. So I think it's really important that people know that what happens in the Congo does not stay in the Congo. The destruction of the rainforest affects all of us, and also
Oh.
the extraction of resources from the DRC
Mm.
for critical minerals without advancing the well-being of the people in the country is an injustice to people like my colleague and friend Guillaume.
Mm. Thank you for raising the awareness of that big issue, Vanessa, which obviously is not limited to the Congo rainforest, but all the precious resources that are so much exploited in Africa and different parts of the world. I think one of the most powerful aspects of your leadership, and you just talked about it, is your intersectional approach. You've said repeatedly that climate justice equals racial justice, equals gender justice, equals social justice. So these are not separate fights. In essence, they are the same fight. And this reminds me of a previous conversation at this podcast with someone you may know or not, Vanessa, Angeline Murimirwa, who is the CEO of CAMFED, who was, again, she leads one of the Africa's largest NGOs focusing on girls' education and empowerment in rural communities. And I think, like you, I mean, she shared with me that you cannot separate climate, gender, education, economic justice. They are all interconnected systems. So I like to keep going now with your different steps of engagement. Vanessa, after Davos, you founded the Rise Up movement to address exactly the problem that crop photo represented. Can you tell us more about Rise Up as a movement? And how does your intersectional approach, linking climate, race, gender, and social justice, make it more effective?
Yes, actually, for Rise Up, it's funny that it was created even before the Davos moment,
Mm.
and in a way, it feels like I don't know. I don't know how to explain it or articulate it in words, but the creation of Rise Up movement really happened before the Davos moment, and it was to again raise a platform, to have this platform that amplifies the stories, voices, and experiences of activists from the African continent. And little did I know that that moment was going to happen. And I think when that moment happened, it made me realize why the movement was actually started.
Yeah.
And with Rise Up, I would say with so many activists that we worked with in Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, Ethiopia, so many activists,
Hmm.
we were able to really create this platform that tells African climate stories, through using social media, through using blogs, but also, organizing capacity building workshops, climate education forums, youth conferences, and in addition to that, supporting the representation of African activists at the conference of parties. So I would say that that was really the role of Rise Up, to
Yeah.
just have this platform that lifts up African activists from different parts of the continent. And we
Mhm.
really did that through the amplification of stories, but also the actual representation in key climate policy moments like COPs. So we would Rise Up had
Mhm.
a couple of delegations at
Yeah.
some climate conferences because we worked to facilitate that, to find resources for that, and I'm really grateful that it was created. And really how it fits into that, I think I've already talked a bit on the intersection of climate and
Mhm.
racial justice, more from the aspect of African communities, but also Black communities in
Yeah.
the United States. But it even, goes deeper than that. Education. At this point, I think we should all understand that climate change is, it's a crisis multiplier. It just makes everything worse. It's not
Mm.
just about emissions rising. When disasters occur, a lot happens in the social context, in the communities.
Yeah.
And I think many times people pay more attention to the emissions rising to actually the social impact
Impact.
on communities. And when you're on the ground, you get to see that. When you visit these communities, you get to see that.
Yeah.
And you even get to know that for these communities, they don't even know the language of emissions,
Yeah.
but they know that
The
weather
impact.
changes are happening. They know the impact.
Yes.
When you speak to the farmers, they can tell that the weather patterns have changed. And because of that, they experience failed harvests. And then the failed harvests mean they
Yeah.
don't have enough income, they don't have enough food. And when they don't have enough income, it means that they're going to get some of their children out of school because they can't pay for their school fees or
Yeah.
tuition, and many
Yeah.
times it's going to be the girls dropping out of school. And then you learn that for some families it's even worse, to the point that they force their girls into
Mm.
early marriages because
Mm.
they receive bride price that can
Yeah.
help their families recover from the climate crisis.
To
So you realize
survive.
that
Mm.
it really starts from people are talking about emissions, but what is
Yes.
happening on the ground does
Is
not even bring the conversation on emissions. It is talking
okay.
about education. It's about the impact on education, especially for girls. It's
Yes.
about the impact on women when it comes to gender-based violence being exacerbated by scarcity
Yeah.
in the home. It comes to the increase in unpaid labor for women in families in their communities. Because when climate disasters occur, when there is food scarcity, when there is water scarcity, it it does not mean that
Mm.
women are not going to work harder to provide food for their families.
Yeah.
The water sources may dry up in the community, but that only means more hours of water collection are being added to women's unpaid labor
Yeah.
to provide for their families. So you get to see that women are disproportionately impacted. Girls are at risk of being forced into early marriages,
Mm.
failed harvests. So there is a lot that really happens beyond
It-
emissions. And it goes back to something that you mentioned, that climate change
yeah. Yeah.
is more than
Uh,
weather, it's more than statistics,
I,
it's
I,
about people.
It's very clear. I think you've done a great job painting that negative flying wheel, Vanessa, of not just, again, those emissions, but actually the anti systems platform communities that are collapsing because of that. No, I like us because I know that you're also very active in promoting some innovative solutions to actually help out, right? And I'd like now to talk about the Vash Green Schools project that consists in installing solar panels and eco-friendly stoves in Ugandan schools. And this connects to me to something else I discussed as well on this podcast. A few years back, I had the pleasure to host Ravi Shah, who's the president of Rockefeller Foundation, and he shared with me the Global Energy Alliance for People on the Planet, which is a $10 billion initiative to accelerate clean energy access, emerging economies with a major focus on Africa. Now, I'd like you to talk about the Vash Green Schools project, which is part of this larger movement, which is so important to create that positive flying wheel in this case. So, why, and can you tell us you focus on the schools, and what difference does solar panel make actually beyond energy for the life of students, of teachers, and the entire communities? What is the positive impact of that?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think for me, this project, one thing that I really love about it is that it reaches people in the community. It directly impacts people in the community. It benefits people in the community, and it's really, really good to see that. And before I dive maybe deeper into it, I'd like to share. I think at the beginning of this year, I know we are still somehow in the beginning of the year, I read this statistic that was talking about uh, global renewable energy investments reaching $2.3 trillion
Hmm.
in 2025. And I was really, really excited about this statistic. And then I attend a webinar that was talking about clean energy investments as well. And then one of the people who are one of the panelists says that, even though we saw massive increase in
Hmm.
renewable energy investments, this actually happened because of the increased demand of electricity by AI data centers.
Hmm.
I was I was surprised. I was really surprised, and in a way, I, I think I went into a moment of I was really disturbed
Hmm.
because I realized that this increase in renewable energy investment is not for people, it's not for communities. It is to advance, corporate profits. It's really not for communities. And I was really, really disturbed by that because I was really excited to see this increase in investment. But then when I got to learn why we have this increase in the first place, I realized that, okay, this is not actually going to benefit the person at the very last mile. And that's why I think projects that reach communities at the grassroots are really, really important, that
Hmm.
benefit communities directly. And that's why I started the Vash Green Schools project in 2019. It also came as an inspiration from a friend of mine from Switzerland. His name is
Mhm.
Tim, who actually supported the 5 schools with the installation, and we gave these schools solar. We also gave them clean cooking stoves. And why did we take this approach? One, the clean cooking stoves reduce on firewood consumption of schools, but they also reduce on the impact of deforestation in those
Yeah.
communities. And they reduce indoor air pollution. They are a benefit to the people that prepare the food, but also for the solar electricity. It helps students be able to to study and have longer hours of studies because they have electricity. They don't have to use candles or uh, kerosene lamps in their homes to read their books. So for me, that is one thing that I
Mm.
really love about this project, because you will see the impact before your eyes in
Yes.
the community. And we've been able to do that. We've reached 75 schools, and so grateful for the people that have supported us along this journey.
No, fantastic to give us a sense again of the impact of such initiative and more to be done, obviously, across the continent. Now, I'd like to talk about another type of engagement you have, Vanessa. In January 2022, Malala Yousafzai appointed you to the Malala Fund Board of Directors. For our listeners, the Malala Fund is a global organization working to ensure every girl can learn and lead. And since its founding in 2013, the fund has invested over $40 million in education in more than 10 countries, 10 billion girls, sorry, across countries like Afghanistan, Brazil, Ethiopia, India, Lebanon, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Turkey. And the connection is powerful. 4 million girls are at risk of losing education due to climate change right now. And that number could reach 12.5 millions already by 25. So help us understand again that connection. You alluded to that before deeply in terms of girls' education and why educating girls is one of the most effective climate solution, actually.
Yeah, I will start with my own story. My parents really invested so much in my education, but also in the education of my siblings. And I believe that that gave me, the opportunity, but also, the tools and the knowledge that I needed to engage in spaces like this. And probably if I never had an education, there is a
Mm.
high possibility I wouldn't be an activist, or I wouldn't have got to learn about some of the things that I learned in my journey of activism. So I
Yes.
do believe that education is one of the most, powerful solutions to addressing the climate crisis. I remember reading a project draw down lists 100 things that
Hmm.
can help us address the climate crisis. And most often in the top 10 solutions,
Yes.
education and women empowerment was always there. So for
Yes.
me, even joining the Malala Fund board, it's in the understanding of when girls are educated, then communities or countries are more positioned to address the climate crisis, but also they are more positioned to, to embrace policies, to initiate and implement policies that ensure the protection of the environment. And I think for so many girls and women, they grow up with that understanding of the vulnerability they face when it comes to the climate crisis. And I
Yeah.
think that greatly positions us to know and understand the necessity
Mm.
to protect the environment and to protect communities. And that's one of the things that also um, really made me join Project Dandelion. Project Dandelion is represented by
Yeah.
this pin that I'm wearing, and Project Dandelion is a women-led climate justice
Hmm.
campaign. And the work that we do is to amplify, platform, and accelerate women climate solutions in communities. And it's still from that understanding that women are already leading solutions. Women are already transforming their communities. They just need the necessary capacity and resources to be able to scale these solutions in their communities. So that is why my work works also at the intersection of
Mm.
girls' education and women empowerment, because I know that when girls are educated, when they grow up, even as they grow up, they already transform the communities,
Can
their communities.
Sorry, it was a bit cut. Tom? Okay. It's okay. We can continue. Uh, so Vanessa, I mean, you are talking about Project Dandelion, right? This is a project co-founded by Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, right, and chair of the
Yes.
Elders. And when she
Yeah.
said, I think famously, when women lead, action follows. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And she has also famously said that climate change is a man-made problem with a feminist solution. So yes.
I didn't know that quote. That's a better one, actually.
Yeah.
No, great quote. No, I'd like to move forward. Actually, very close today, right? To date in 2024. Again, alongside all this work we've been talking about, you made for people a surprising decision to step back from frontline activism and go to Oxford, where you enrolled in a Master of Public Policy program at Oxford's Blavatnik School of Government. And for many activists, this would feel like abandoning the fight, but you saw it differently, obviously, right? I mean, it was not about abandoning the fight. And based on your years, before we get into that policy study, I like to go back again to your roots as an activist. What do you see as a superpower of an activist, Vanessa, that you've been building, shaping, and that you continue to drive today?
I would say that the understanding of working as a collective instead of working as an individual.
Yeah.
I read a quote that once said that we don't need individual heroes, we need collective heroes, people working together. And I
Yeah.
think that is something that I have learned in my journey of activism
Mm.
because it is truly, it can be an intense journey, it can be overwhelming, it can be a lot of work. It's also sometimes a really frustrating journey. So there are moments where you feel disappointed, there are moments where you feel tired, there are moments where you even want to give up. However, the understanding of being able to work within a community, to work with a collective, I think in that there is a hope that it gives you to continue the work, to know that you're not just doing this by yourself, but there are many
Yeah.
people who are advancing the same vision. And sometimes there are moments when I feel like, what if I never see, the climate justice in my lifetime? And it can be
Mm.
overwhelming to actually think about that. However, what
Yeah.
has helped me in such moments is the understanding that, when I think about the people that really fought for civil rights in the civil rights movement, when I think about the
Mm.
people that started the feminism fight, I realize that some of these people may not be here today to see the impact of the work that they did, and we get to live and experience the benefits of
Mm.
their work, some of the things that they dreamed to achieve. And it gives me comfort in knowing that the work that I do is not just for myself or something that I would love to see in my lifetime or in my generation. It gives me hope that someone who will come in the next generation, even when I'm not here, might be able to experience and see, some of the benefits and achievements of the work that we are all doing. And also deciding to go to Oxford, I'm really grateful that the Blavatnik School of Government,
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that the Blavatnik School of Government gave me that opportunity. I was also able to study on the Waden Hoffman Scholarship, and it really gave me an opportunity to understand how policy works, something that I didn't know so much as an activist.
Mm.
And I really hope that I can still make an impact in another way. It may not be the same way that I
Yeah.
have been doing it, but I hope to still make an impact. And I think sometimes it's wisdom
So,
to know when to pass the mic to other people.
Yeah. So can you tell us more about that reflection you have, Vanessa? Clearly, you've been very active as an activist for many years. You posed while studying public policies. How much of a different activist you think are you now today? What are the things you're going to do differently, given again that learning curve you went through? What do you think about that?
I would say that before, when I just started activism and the years that came along that, I would say that I was on the front lines. I was really
Mm,
working so hard on the front lines of the movement, and I was engaging in so many interviews and so many public speaking engagements as well across the world. And like I said, you know, you have to be able to pace yourself, because activism can be really tiring. It can be it can be an overwhelming thing to do,
mm,
and I think I have grown to learn the understanding that for me, activism in my case, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Because if you
yes.
treat it as a sprint, then you're going to burn out. And I did have some of those moments of burnout.
Mm,
But now I know, like, I know when to speak, I know when to engage.
mm.
I think that will help me sustain my activism for a long time. If I continue to run the way I used to, I am not able to sustain it. And I would love to sustain it.
I mean, a lot of wisdom in what you just shared, Vanessa, given your young age. I wish I had the same wisdom at your age, actually, of pacing to run the
Thank you.
marathon as opposed to sprinting all the time. No, I like to go back to a moment as well, which I think has been very moving for you. In September 2022, you're appointed UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, and your first trip was to Turkana County in northwestern Kenya, experiencing the worst drought in 40 years. You visited UNICEF supported hospitals and nutrition centers. You met children suffering from severe acute malnutrition. You also met mothers who couldn't feed their babies. And you met, in particular, a young boy receiving treatment for malnutrition. And the next day, you learned that he had passed away. In your remarks at the UN, you said, another preventable death, another life lost because we acted too slowly. People are dying, children are dying. Can you tell us about that moment and that boy? And do you carry that story and the way you stay resilient despite those very tragic stories that you've been living with?
Yeah, I will start by saying that UNICEF has really given me a platform to be able to talk about these stories and amplify these stories and share them with the world, especially for some of these children who may not be able to get in front of a camera, may not be able to stand on a global stage to talk about their experiences. I'm really grateful that I've had the opportunity to talk about this. And it's not easy talking about it. However, I've always told myself that, you know, for many of these children, it is a much worse reality. It's a reality that, something that I said earlier, it's a reality of either life or death. There is definitely a thin line. And I saw that when
Yeah.
I visited Turkana County, as really excited to meet the children. And I knew exactly where I was going. I knew there was a drought. I think I just didn't realize how terrible it was. And when I got to that hospital, and I saw some of these kids, and I remember meeting this specific child, and he was with his grandmother, and she was, she was worried. She didn't have any hope, uh, or she had limited hope, and even the doctors in the hospital said that he was in a wasted situation, what they call wasted, meaning that there was really, really limited chance for his survival. And then the next day, when we got to learn that he had passed away, it was really hard. It was really, really hard. And it just made me realize that I think I got to see someone die because of malnutrition that was caused by food scarcity, which was exacerbated by the drought.
Yeah.
And it made me realize that that could have been a preventable death. And there's so many people right now who are dying, and yet they don't have to.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have to if the right decisions were being taken to protect communities and preserve their well-being.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that very moving story among many others, obviously touching a lot of lives in Africa. Now, I'd like to shift gears and discuss one of your most consistent themes that we briefly touch on. Wealthy nations and again corporations that cause the climate crisis. You believe, and many people believe as well, that they must pay for loss and damage in vulnerable countries. And at COP29 in November 24, you made headlines by declining to attend. You called the COP process like a talk show, honestly. And the final agreement of that COP was $300 billion per year by 2035, far short of the $1.3 trillion vulnerable nations said that they needed. So, can you explain for listeners, Vanessa, the case for loss and damage finance from a justice perspective, and why is this non-negotiable?
Yeah, I think for many people, as the climate crisis escalates, it's really pushing communities beyond adaptation. And I've said this before that, communities cannot adapt to starvation. They cannot adapt to the loss of their cultures or the loss of their histories. They cannot adapt to the loss of lives. And when people cannot adapt to the climate crisis anymore, then it becomes loss and damage. And that is, why the loss and damage finance is needed to help communities recover from the unadaptable impacts of climate change. And I know the loss and damage fund was operationalized, and I believe about 700 something million dollars is on that fund right now since it was operationalized. And for people on the front lines, this is still not enough,
Yeah,
because what people need beyond millions of dollars annually to protect them from climate impacts.
yeah,
So there is still the issue of sustainability, how to sustain and ensure the flow of the much needed finance in the loss and damage fund. And also there have been calls for grant based finance so that countries are not locked into debt that will continue affecting their communities. There's a report that was recently released that was talking about the linkage of debt, fossil fuels, and gender. So when countries are locked in high external debt, then they cannot even support critical social services because most of their money is going towards debt servicing. So it's really important that even the finance that comes to the loss and damage fund comes in the form of grants and not loans.
Yeah, so clearly there's a big need of additional financing, which are badly missing for resolving many of the gaps we discussed together, Vanessa. Now, I'd like us to move on for the last segment of our discussion on leadership, because at the end of the day, the podcast is about positive leadership, and so. You've seen suffering, injustice, and too many broken promises. But yet, it's very clear to me in our conversation, Vanessa, you still believe in the power of people to create the change. And you've said that when the future feels far away, you choose to look for the light already visible in the presence. So, what light have you seen recently? And what gives you energy and reminds you why this fight matters?
I mean, a lot is happening right now in the world to, point out to the light or what really, really brings hope in this moment. However, one of the things that I can point out that I think brings a moment of hope is the conference that will be happening in Santa Marta next month on the transitioning away from fossil fuels. It is
Mm,
going to bring, a coalition of governments who are or which are endorsing the fossil fuel phase out and the transition to renewable energy, and also bring civil society. I do believe this is such a critical moment in the fight for climate justice, and it does make it, it makes it worth it. I
mm,
would say that I think that makes this fight worth it is, I think it's people, the joy, or the peace in my heart that comes with knowing that my work is making the world a better place. I think that for me it really, really gives me hope. And again, on the aspect of leadership, it reminds me of something that one of my professors at the Blavatnik School of Government said when we had just started the program. He said that a
mhm,
good leader knows when to step up and
mm.
when to step down. And
Yeah.
I think I'm using that a lot in my activism. There are moments when I know I need to step up and speak. There are also
Yes.
moments when I know that I need to step down and pass the mic to someone else.
I love it. So wise again, because again, for listeners, Vanessa, you are just 28 and you have already lived so many chapters, starting again as a lone climate striker, becoming this global voice, UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, Malala Fund, and now again, this Oxford graduate, policy graduate. And you've seen changes on both sides, from the front lines of activism and now inside the world of policy. And I think you are now at a very important moment, by the way, taking stock of everything you've learned and thinking about how to use it in the next chapter of your journey. So, Vanessa, obviously, my question is what's next for you? What is the synthesis of the activist you were and the policy leader you are becoming? What is next for Vanessa?
Yeah, actually, I'm 29 right now. I turned 29 in November,
Wow.
and last year, I would say what's really next for me. It's hard to say like this is next for me in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years. One thing I know is that I want to do the best that I can to continue contributing to the climate justice fight. And for now, I'm focusing on doing that through, building and working on climate narratives, and also advancing climate policy in the work that I'm doing. So for me right now, the focus will be more on climate narrative and policy, but also remembering that message from my professor that there'll be moments where I need to step up. And
Yes.
I think in the coming years, I will try to to be able to identify and know when those moments are happening so that I can step up when it's needed.
Super clear. My very last question, Vanessa, which is a question I love to ask to my guests, what advice would you give to young leaders from Africa, from Europe, from the US, from Asia, from all over the world, who want to make a positive difference in the world, but don't know where to start? What would be your advice for all those young people?
When I think about how I started, one, it was through inspiration from someone else, another young leader from another part of the world. And I think my advice is always that you don't have to start alone, especially when there are already people in your community that are advancing change, either through environmental work or education or racial justice, or like any social issue that you are working on. I think it's always important to find that community, because it's really critical in your journey of making the world a better place. When you are alone, it definitely gets lonely, and it gets really hard, and it gets frustrating, and you can almost give up when you are alone. But again, when you are working with people, when you know that you have community, then it's easier to sustain the activism work in whatever field that you're working in. So for me, I would say is just find your community, and when you find your community, then it will make activism much easier.
I love it, and I love the power of communities. Indeed, Vanessa, something I've been very committed to all along my life. And I believe this is a place to start driving a positive impact in the world. Vanessa, thank you so much for your wisdom, for this very inspiring, insightful conversation. I know our listeners will come away with very powerful lessons about finding their voice, turning adversity into action, and choosing hope even when change feels too slow. And to all our listeners, thank you again for joining us on this Positive Leaderships podcast. Feel free, obviously, to subscribe or to share that with your friends, to leave a comment, or even 5 stars is welcome. You check out my newsletter as well every month. And take care of yourself. Until next time, stay positive and keep leading with purpose. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, JP, as well. I really loved it.